GRE math is easier than GMAT math.
Hi, and welcome to MBA Pod TV. I'm your host, Bob O'Keefe. Scoring highly in the quantitative section of the GMAT lets admissions officers know that you're ready for the academic rigor that comes along with business school, particularly in quantitative courses such as statistics or finance. But what if your quantitative score is lower than you'd hoped for? Today, I'll be sitting down with Brian Galvin, Director of Academic Programs at Veritas Prep, a GMAT prep and admissions consulting company. Brian scored in the 99th percentile on the GMAT. We'll discuss strategies on how to improve a low quant score and run through a GMAT problem. You'll hear what admissions directors have to say about your GMAT score, and you'll also find out whether the GRE is an option for you.
When someone looks at their GMAT score, specifically the quant side, how low is low? Do they look at percentages, maybe a specific score? How would you advise someone?
Typically for a top 10, top 15 program, kind of that golden ratio is 80th percentile on either side, which in and of itself will get you 700 or above. So that's kind of that, the holy trinity of GMAT scores if you're applying to a top school, which isn't to say that 78th percentile being, slightly below 80th on one side or the other is going to keep you out. They will look for red flags. If you're 99th percentile in quant, 50th in verbal, or vice versa, you may have a high overall score, but the balance is a little bit off. So sort of looking at the range for your schools, kind of the middle 80%, which for any top 10 school is probably going to average right around 700 therein or above, 5 above, 5 below, something like that. And then trying to have as much balance as possible.
If a candidate's retaking the test, they really don't want to take it again, or maybe they don't have time, is there some way that they can supplement a low quant score? Other areas in the application, maybe?
We've had candidates before who have taken, community college math classes, a calculus class here or there, to be able to demonstrate a willingness to understand and attack math, which is helpful. My other thought on that is if you have the time to take one of those classes, you probably have the time to improve your score, and that score is just the easiest standardized way of being able to say everyone takes the same test, and this person has clearly demonstrated facility with the skills we consider to be important.
Now remember, the GMAT's just one factor in your application. There are many pieces of information that are just as important in your application, but a low GMAT score does raise red flags and will appear as a weakness. We'll get into some strategies on how to improve your score in just a moment. But first, let's talk to this admissions director on how she'd evaluate a low GMAT score.
If you had a low score either on the verbal side or the quantitative side, I would then look at your transcript and look at your undergraduate degree and see if there was some sort of discrepancy. For example, if you scored lower on the quantitative side on the GMAT, you might be able to, in an additional essay, look at your transcript and say, well, my transcript was a very heavily quantitative-based undergraduate degree, and that might be able to explain a little bit about your low quantitative score. For anyone that has a low score on the GMAT, I think the best recommendation is to take some time, and whether it's taking some sort of a preparatory course or if you do some sort of online course yourself, just set aside the time, prepare for it, and go back and take it again. Most schools allow you to take that GMAT as many times as you want, and then obviously we'll only look at the highest score. So anything that you can do to raise your GMAT score will obviously help in your whole application process.
Let's say a candidate has taken the GMAT, they got back their scores, and they're not pleased with what they received in terms of quant. What are some of the strategies that they could possibly employ for the second time around, and what do they need to think through before taking the test again?
I think most people know that in a vacuum, they could answer most of these questions. It's high school level math and things you may need to dig back a little bit for. But in pacing, if you're a little bit under the gun, you either rush and set things up incorrectly, or you're so happy to be at the end of a question because you know you need to get to the next one that you may miss that last step of, they're asking you to solve for Y, but you solved for X and give them that. And so usually you're going to make mistakes at the beginning or the end of a question if you're rushing. So getting your pacing under control is a pretty big help. The other one, which is a lot less likely for anybody that, like you said, you thought you prepared adequately, but does happen, is sometimes you just don't understand the math. And in those cases, doing more GMAT prep. I think a lot of people dive into the official guide for GMAT review or some of the Veritas Prep books or something like that. Do as many GMAT problems as possible when really what it comes down to is I'm just not great with exponents in algebra, or I haven't used percentages and fractions in a long time. If you go back, we actually have a lesson for our students called Math Essentials that's no GMAT problems. It's all just drills on particular algebraic skills and arithmetic skills. If you shore those up, that'll help with the timing as well and your confidence overall.
Now let's see if you can follow along with this problem-solving question.
Problem-solving questions, I think in a lot of cases, they try to bait you. These are really interesting, I think, because they try to bait you with something that looks really mathematical. So in this case, they're going to give you a huge number. What is the sum of the digits of 10 to the 30th, which, you know, the founders of Google, it's probably somewhere around a Googleplex, minus 37. It's a huge number, one that you wouldn't want to calculate for any reason.
Unless you had a calculator.
Exactly. Even that, typing in 30 zeros is going to be, if you tried to write this one out, you're going to spend your 2 minutes per question trying to figure out how to fit it on your noteboard. If you look at it logically, though, 10 to the 30th is 1 with 30 zeros. You can picture what this number is going to look like by trying a number you know. Say 100 minus 37 is 63. Pretty simple arithmetic. If you want 1,000 minus 37, it's going to be 963. And if you follow that pattern, kind of again think through the logic, this is going to end up with a whole lot of 9s, a 6, and a 3. Then it just comes down to, and 6 plus 3, if you're summing the digits, is another 9. Then it just comes down to how many 9s. And if you know that it's 1 with 30 digits, and every time you say 100 minus 37, you're going to end up with 2 digits when you started with 3. Well, if you started with 31 digits, the 1 and 30 zeros, you're going to have 30 total digits. Most of them 9s, a 6 and a 3, so 28 9s, and then 6 plus 3 is another 9. You have 29 9s total, and then you can just multiply it out and get to 261. If you think about it in a business school context, can this candidate for business school, as a future manager, see a unique situation and then recognize that there's probably a more logical solution? Go back to the cases you went through at Harvard Business School and realize that this process works well to solve this unique problem. That's what they do on a lot of these math problems. It's, can you see what's familiar and logical in something that actually looks a little bit unique and time-consuming? The more efficient you are, the more logical you are, the more successful you're going to be.
There's been a recent trend among business schools of accepting the GRE as opposed to the GMAT. The GRE is a standardized test that's accepted across a wide variety of graduate school programs, whereas the GMAT was designed specifically for business schools. If you're considering taking the GRE over the GMAT, here's what you need to know.
It kind of depends on what they plan in terms of their application strategy. If they are applying to a range of business schools, they should look and see what tests are acceptable for those schools. And I would tell them focus on the test that's going to serve you best in your application process. So, if they're only interested in applying to Stern and the GRE is something that they're interested in pursuing, great. If they're interested in applying to a range of schools and some of those schools only take the GMAT, they might be better served just to focus on one test and do the GMAT. The GMAT still is a standard. It has great history behind it in terms of its predictive capability, in terms of how people will do academically. But the GRE is something now we also look at. It's great for dual degree people as well, people who are pursuing public policy as well as an MBA. So it does allow people pursuing those dual degrees to be able to take one test and kind of serve both purposes, which is nice for them as well.
GRE math is easier than GMAT math, which is, again, sort of a double-edged sword. In some ways, yes, it's an easier test and a little bit easier for you to master as a student of the GRE versus the GMAT. But if you think about what they're doing, if you look at your GMAT score, they care a lot about percentile. It's not necessarily, did you answer 90% of the questions right? It's, how did you do relative to 90% of the other test takers? So because the GRE is easier, you also have a tendency to be able to see your score plummet in percentile terms by missing a handful of questions, whereas on the GMAT, you get a little bit of flexibility. You can miss a couple questions, get on a roll again, and your score improves and relative to everyone else. One other interesting note about the GRE as a test, the reason that a lot of schools are using it now or accepting it now is because they want to get as many elite level applicants as possible. So they want to find people who may have been an ideal candidate for School of Public Policy, School of Public Health, an advanced degree in economics or finance, master in finance, something like that, where the GRE was the test they took to be able to apply to those programs. What Harvard Business School or some of the others that are accepting the GRE are hoping is that an ideal candidate may look at this and say, you know what, Harvard Business School actually has a really similar program that maybe does better job placement for me with what I'd like to do. now that I think about it, that may be a better fit for me than Kennedy School of Government or one of these other programs. I'd love to apply it maybe late in the game. I only have a GRE score. That's why Harvard accepts the GRE, not necessarily so that GMAT students who are concerned about the quantitative section have an easier option. So that's really who they're after. If you're a marginal applicant, I hate to use that term, but if you see yourself as someone as, this is kind of a reach for me, but I'd love to get in, I think I can do 80th percentile GRE, whereas my GMAT's 70th percentile. That's not going to be a difference maker for you.
And that's it this time on MBA Pod TV. I'm your host, Bob O'Keefe. Visit us at mbapodcaster.com to register for weekly audio and video shows. You can join us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest news and insight on your MBA application process.